So, David is presenting on the life and ministry of Bishop Benedict Miller, and then 1825 to 37. And this time he won't be pausing for discussion in the middle. He'll go through the whole thing, and then at the end there'll be Q&A. So, if you need to remember your questions, maybe jot them down if there was something at the beginning that struck your interest. Who wants to be the bad guy and tap shoulders in the back? That'll definitely get attention. There we go. When there's group silence, then it usually gets attention too. Okay. Maybe I'll just repeat that quickly. The next section is the life and ministry of Bishop Benedict Miller, 1825 to 37. And this time, David won't be pausing for questions in the middle. He'll go through the whole thing, and then there will be time for that at the end. If you need to remember a question you have, go ahead and jot it down somehow for that section. Also, in the back at the table, there are CDs for each session that was recorded today. A total of 4 CDs, one for what Jim Yoder presented, one for Marvin Yoder, and then one each for these 2 presentations this morning. They're $2 a piece, so just have that in mind if you would like to take the recording with you. Finally, there's another section here about the offering, or about an offering here at 11. I think it was maybe a misprint there. So if you've been in and out and you didn't have a chance to give in the offering the first time through, you're welcome to make that donation in a basket there at the table in the back on your way down to lunch. There's also donations for lunch, so just have all that in mind to help cover the costs of having an event like this happen. I think that's everything I have. With that being said, I'll invite David back up to the pulpit here, and he can begin his final presentation.
As in the previous presentation, I have prepared a paper that I shall be reading. And I should explain too that the graphics or the projection that you've been seeing on the previous one and this one would not have happened if I wouldn't have had some extensive and excellent help from my daughter Phyllis Swartz to put that together. Without her help, there would have been either none or one of inferior quality. I'm not sure which it would have been. The name Benedict Miller has been a household word in the Cassleman Valley and in other places in past and present generations. Benedict has been recognized by the Casselman Historians in earlier annual meetings. The historian has carried articles on Benedict. A biographical sketch by Alta Schrock is found in the Joel B. Miller history. So why this biographical presentation on Benedict now? We are focusing this year on the Amish Church of 1825 to 1850 in the Casselman Valley. Benedict was the Amish bishop during the first half of that period. He was an integral part of the picture of the church. The purpose of this presentation is to see Benedict as a church leader in that period. Benedict was a descendant of immigrants of Swiss background who had come from Germany to America. His paternal grandfather, John Miller, also known as Hannes, and because of a wound received in an attempt attack by Indians as Indian John. His maternal ancestry included the immigrant John Jacob Stutzman, who arrived in Philadelphia in 1727, and Jacob Hostetler, who arrived in Philadelphia in 1736. These families first settled in Berks County, Pennsylvania. When Benedict was about 2 years old in 1781, his parents, Jacob and Anna Stutzman Miller, moved from Berks County to Somerset County, Pennsylvania. They first lived in the Glades area, Berlin, and later, when Benedict was a preteen, in present-day Elk Lick Township. Here, Benedict grew to adulthood. In 1803, I want to get myself situated a little better here. Now I think we're ready for business. In 1803, at 21 years of age, Benedict married Catherine, daughter of immigrant and pioneer Peter Beachy II. It is not known where Benedict and Catherine lived in the earliest years of their marriage, but it is thought that their first residence was his father Jacob's farm at the foot of Negro Mountain, Farm 1 on the map, when Jacob moved to Ohio in 1809. According to land deeds and contracts, Benedict and Catherine also lived on Mount Nebo, south of Grantsville, and south of the curves of the Cassleman River as their second residence. See Farm 2 on the map. By 1819, they were living on her home farm, where they raised their family and where both died and are buried. See Farm 3. Catherine died at the age of 43 in 1834, and Benedict at the age of 55 in 1837. Benedict's second wife also was named Catherine. She was Catherine Aish Keim, widow of Nicholas Keim. The date of Benedict's second marriage is unknown. In this marriage, 2 daughters were added to the family. Lydia was born in 1835, and Magdalena was born in 1837, 1 month after Benedict's death. But let's return to the family of Benedict's first marriage. In 1825, the first year of this study, Benedict and Catherine nee Beachy had 10 children, ranging in age from 4 years to 20 years. In the previous year, 1824, they were bereft of their firstborn child, Henry, who died at the age of 19. My search for the cause of Henry's death, whether by accident or illness, has not been fruitful. Assumably, Henry was buried in the cemetery on Benedict's farm. Benedict was surrounded by a growing family during his later years as bishop. Most of the 11 children who grew to adulthood lived in the local area. Elizabeth may have lived in Cambria County, Pennsylvania, after her marriage to Isaac Aish of that area. Susanna and Daniel P. Gingrich moved to Ohio in the spring of 1837, shortly before Benedict's death. Others moved west to Ohio, and some moved further west to Iowa after Benedict's death. The genealogies and other sources list the church affiliation of each of the 11 as Amish or Amish Mennonite. Benedict, as a leader and bishop in the church, apparently enjoyed the support and participation of his family in church life. From the time of his ordination as minister in 1809 and bishop in 1813, Benedict served in those capacities until his death in 1837 at the age of 55. Back when the congregation voted for minister, Benedict's cousin, Yost Miller, had many more votes than did Benedict, But of the 3 men with enough votes to be placed into the lot, Benedict drew the lot and was ordained as minister. In the Amish church, the bishop carried major administrative responsibilities. In addition to sharing the preaching schedule with the other ministers, in that plural ministerial arrangement, the bishop was responsible for major leadership in church polity and discipline. The bishop, and only the bishop, officiated the communion services, baptisms, and weddings. He gave leadership in the discipline of the wayward members and to restoring penitents to fellowship. The bishop officiated in ordinations. The bishop ordination charge included, quote, "When you become aged and weak, see that a successor is put into your place," end of quote. The ceremony included a benediction. Dazu wollen dich der Herr stärken und bekräftigen mit seinem heiligen und guten Geist durch Jesum Christen. Amen. To that end, may the Lord strengthen and enable you through his holy and good Spirit, through Jesus Christ. Amen. I am not aware of any extant sermon material, magazine articles, or letters to other church leaders written by Benedict. But a glimpse into Benedict's pulpit appeal is given in a letter of 1895. That's important to get that straight. This is way later, but looking back, it harks back to the time of Benedict's active ministry. The letter writer, Daniel Beachy of Aurora, West Virginia, remembered overhearing a comment of his own grandfather, Peter Beachy II, who was Benedict's father-in-law. A minister from Ohio, a son of Peter II, had preached in the Cassleman River congregation, Amish church, and afterward Peter II commented, and here I'm quoting what was written about this: "Moses, the guest preacher, is coming along very well in his ministry of preaching, and he appears to do it without much trouble. His preaching is nice. I like to hear him, and I'm glad that he came, but he does not reach the heart like Benedict Miller does." An example of Benedict's sermon applications was gleaned through Alta Schrock's inquiry into local family lore. As told to and reported by Alta, Benedict was holding forth in a plea against profanity and compared the term for Timothy Hay with a profane reference to the deity. "I know what Timothy Hay, hoi demet, is," he told his audience. "Gott demet, I do not recognize." Benedict had no use for profanity in any form and chose to use a play on words to drive home his point. Daniel Beachy's letter of 1895 also shares a testimony on Benedict's ministry in congregational mediation and expository preaching. As described by Peter Miller, a minister from Germany, quote, "There was strife in the Amish church in Germany, and Benedict was such an excellent preacher and expositor of Scripture that the church in Germany wrote to him. After he wrote an answer back to them, peace was restored soon." I should explain this is not a quote directly from Peter. This is as reported by Daniel Beachy years later and by memory. But small wonder that Peter Miller was very disappointed upon arriving in Germany in 1837 to learn that Benedict had died shortly before. Benedict's ministerial outreach found expression in other ways too. Family lore has him going by horseback to Ohio for ministry in the fledgling Amish congregation where his father and brothers had gone. According to a great-grandson, Gideon Miller, when Benedict overnighted in Wheeling, the German innkeeper in Wheeling asked Benedict to preach to the other guests at the inn. The time of this event is unknown, but we do know that construction of the National Road reached Wheeling in 1818. We can visualize Benedict traveling the National Road from Grantsville to Wheeling, spending the night there, and preaching a German sermon. Leaving Wheeling, he would have crossed the Ohio River on a ferry with his horse and proceeded northwest along the basic route of present-day US 250 to Sugar Creek. We wish for details of his time there with his relatives and the church in Ohio. Benedict participated in regional and interstate Amish ministers' meetings. From 1826 to 1831, various meetings dealt with the question of baptism. The specific question, when a Mennonite wants to join the Amish church, is rebaptism by an Amish bishop required? An Amish bishop in Ohio had received a Mennonite into church membership without rebaptism. The prevailing understanding of the ministers throughout Pennsylvania, including Somerset County, insisted on rebaptism. The prevailing understanding of the Ohio ministry saw a second baptism as inappropriate. Benedict's participation in these meetings in 1826, 1827, and 1830 is not clear, but the record clearly shows that Benedict was among those called to Ohio to work with the question in November 1831. Some reports suggest that the issue was solved and was at peace, but a letter of dissatisfaction with the conclusions of 1830 and 1831 emerged in 1838, too late for Benedict's involvement. As noted earlier in this meeting, Benedict was one of 13 ministers in a meeting in the Glades, Berlin, Pennsylvania, on March 18, 1837. Statements were made on 12 points of discipline. This was a meeting of ministers of the three Somerset County Amish churches, Conemaugh at Johnstown, the Glades, Berlin, and the Cassleman at the river. 3 names of ministers of the river congregation are listed. In addition to Benedict, Jost Yoder and Hannes Gingrich were there from the river congregation. Jost Yoder, who was listed, was contemporary with Benedict, only 3 years younger, age 53 when they went to the meeting in the Glades in 1837. Jost's grandfather was named Jost, was an immigrant of that family and had settled in Berks County. His father, Henry Yoder, is thought to have been the first of the family and perhaps the earliest of the Amish to settle in the Cassleman Valley. He bought land near Summit Mills. We do not know the name of Jost's ordination, we do not know the time of Jost's ordination, whether before or after Benedict's. We have no documents that reveal his preaching style or content. But in addition to the meeting of 1837, Jost also attended a meeting in 1830 on the issue of rebaptizing applicants who were baptized by others. Those appearances of Jost Yoder as a minister and the documentation of his residence in Summit Mills indicate that he did serve as a co-minister with Benedict. His ministry likely extended through much or all of Benedict's tenure from 1809 to his death in 1837. Hans Gingrich also served with Benedict, though briefly. The minutes of 1837 meeting at Glades list him as from the river congregation. Hans has been identified as John P. Gingrich, who arrived in Baltimore from Germany in 1835 with a trip of 54 days by sail ship. Ordained in Germany, This minister signed the church letter brought to America by immigrant Jacob Schwarzengruber in 1833. John, with his wife Frederica and 7 children, must have followed the national pike from Baltimore to Grantsville in Somerset County. They first settled in the Glades. John's brother, Daniel P., married Benedict's daughter, Susan, in the same year, 1835. But his listing as a minister in the River Church places him into the Cassleman Valley in 1837, though apparently without owning land and without staying long enough for the 1840 census. After a move to Fairfield County, Ohio, John ventured on into Iowa and is counted among the founders of the Amish church there. Apparently, John Gingrich participated in the ministry of the River Church during a short sojourn in that area before moving to Ohio and then to Iowa. Jonas Beachy likely served as a minister alongside Bishop Benedict. Jonas succeeded Benedict as bishop in the Cassleman Valley after Benedict's death. We lack reference to the time of Jonas's ordination as bishop, but Jonas officiated a wedding in 1843, which is evidence of his ordination before that time. He likely was a minister during Benedict's lifetime. Jonas was 46 years old when Benedict died, and his 12th child was born 3 months after the meeting at Berlin. His family situation may explain Jonas's absence of signature on the report of the ministers' meeting of 1837. And it may not have occurred to Jonas that 185 years later the reason for his absence would be questioned in a meeting of history seekers 2 miles south of his home. Jonas was a bivocational minister. His farm was the second next farm east of Benedict's. The U.S. Census of 1850 places a value on his land, implements, and livestock among the larger agricultural enterprises of Elkhart Township. More is known of Jonas's life and ministry in the time after 1850. Henry Hostetler was a deacon. He moved from Elklick Township to Ohio in 1832 at 59 years of age. He likely served as deacon in the River congregation before moving to Ohio. Daniel Hirschberger served as a minister until his death in 1885. The date of his ordination is lost. At the time of the 1837 meeting, he was 28 years of age, was married to Sarah Nagy, and was the father of 1 child. But we lack knowledge of his ministerial status during Benedict's lifetime, and perhaps others were among the ministers of whom record is lost. The Amish congregation was scattered from Myersdale to Grantsville, and eventually south to Biddinger and beyond. That was a stretch of 25 miles. Typical rural roads in those days, as described by one historian, consisted of 2 dirt paths with a grassy strip in the middle, and they were rough and bumpy. Wagon wheels formed deep ruts, and those same dirt paths turned into a muddy mess. With such conditions, horseback or even walking may have been more comfortable than horse-drawn wheels. But how was Benedict equipped for travel? Did Benedict have a buggy? We do not find a buggy in Benedict Miller's estate papers, perhaps because buggy had not yet entered the American English vocabulary. But neither's carriage, meaning a lightweight horse-drawn vehicle with seats for transporting people, found in the lists. The closest we come is wagon. 2 are listed among the items of Benedict's farm equipment. But Benedict did have saddles, including a side saddle, the kind used by women, and conceivably much local riding was bareback. Historians tell us that the lightweight carriage such as the buggy was a status symbol in urban areas in the early 1800s, but was not in common use in the rural areas in America. But by 1870, the light four-wheeled horse-drawn carriage became widely available. By then, the buggy was improved by better technology, mass production, affordable prices, and roads were better. But I've not found the equivalent of a buggy among Benedict's estate papers. Vehicles for driving purposes were not totally absent in Benedict's circles and time. He was present at the ministers' meeting 1837, where concern was expressed about excess driving of sleighs, unmäßige Schlitten fahren, and other vehicles. Apparently, some showy vehicles had appeared among members of the church. The ministers took a position against bright multicoloring of sleighs and wagons, which they said already had occurred too much. Benedict's ministry, as commissioned by the church, came to an end with his seemingly untimely death on June 11, 1837. Ordained as minister in the Amish church in 1809, Benedict was chosen for ordination again in 1813, this time as bishop. In both cases, the congregation cast its vote for selection of a man from the congregation for ordination. In both cases, Benedict was named often enough for his name to be placed into the lot, and Benedict drew the lot and was ordained. The story that Benedict had planned to migrate to Ohio is supported by the land records of Tuscarawas County, Ohio, where he had bought land but later sold it. Benedict's great-grandson, Jonas B. Miller, informed genealogist Harvey Hostetler of the situation at Benedict's ordination. This resulted in the following insert in Descendants of Barbara Hostetler and Christian Stutzman, quote, "At the time of his selection for ministry, Benedict had already sold his farm and was planning to move to near Shanesville, Ohio, where his father and brothers had gone. His selection for the ministry decided him that his place was in the ministry among the people he had been chosen to serve, and he arranged to buy his farm again that he might remain and preach the gospel." There may be a question about the timing of Benedict's resolve to stay in Somerset County. Was it with the first or the second ordination? Either way, it speaks to a serious commitment to ministry that apparently endured to the end of his life. An interesting testimony of Benedict's commitment to ministry is found in the notes of Jonas B. Miller when he addressed the reunion of the Joel B. Miller descendants in 1929. His notes include this one-liner: "Moves to Beachy Farm to be centrally located in congregation." The Beachy Farm is number 3 on the map. Before that move, Benedict's location on Mount Nebo may have been the southmost location of the Amish settlement. A move from one farm to another in order to be more accessible to his people represents his commitment to ministry. It may seem to us today that the difference between Mount Nebo and Springs for a more central location is insignificant, but with the roads and means of conveyance of the period and the absence of telephone service, every mile made a difference, not only for a pastor to reach his people, but also for the people to reach the pastor. Benedict would not have sought the ministry for material gain. The Amish minister did not have a paid position. Benedict was bivocational, preacher and farmer. Benedict was a farmer throughout his lifetime. He grew up as a farm boy on his father's farm along present-day Davis Road near Springs at the foot of Negro Mountain. There he apparently lived and farmed when his father moved to Ohio in 1809. By 1815, Benedict was farming the tracts of land known as Miller's Choice and Mount Nebo, south of Grantsville and south of the bend of the Casselman River. He had purchased that land from his father, Jacob. But by April 15, 1819, Benedict was in possession of 281 acres of Barkelt, having purchased the farm from his father-in-law, Peter Beachy. There we find Benedict domiciled from 1819 to the time of his death in 1813. When Benedict bought the farm from Peter II, his bid was the highest in the process of competitive bidding. The price was £2,000, of which payment was deferred on £500. Half of the deferred principal would be due upon the death of either Peter or Catherine Beachy, and the other half upon the death of the other. Apparently, the interest on the deferred amount was intended to support the parents during the remainder of their lives. On the screen, note the signatures on the left-right corner: Benedict Miller, Peter Beachy. The final sentence of the deed reads: Der Besitz soll gegeben werden bis den April 15. 1819. The property shall be handed over on April 15, 1819. Though active in preaching and other church work, Benedict's farm operated on a relatively high level. According to the inventory of his estate in 1837 and the list of items sold at the auction, his activity in blacksmithing and woodworking are evidenced by the list of tools. The inclusion of products of the farm, garden, orchard, and house speak of a productive enterprise in progress at the time of his sudden death at age 55. That productivity was accomplished without energy of electricity or gasoline in the shop, on the farm, in the home, or on the road. More attention can be given in another study to the specifics of Benedict's estate and the resulting picture of his involvement as farmer, cabinet maker, and blacksmith. Numerous stories tell of Benedict reaching out to individuals and families. He is known for taking German immigrants under his wing, helping orphans in need, buying tracts of land apparently to make land available to others. He treated the corn thief with firmness and kindness, including a breakfast and a gift of a bag of corn. He paid the debt of a poor boy who had unknowingly been strapped with it. He took penniless immigrants under his wing by providing assistance and, in some cases, employment. He built a schoolhouse out of concern for the next generation. One example of Benedict's benevolence occurred not long before his death, as told by Alta Schrock, quoting Alta. One of the last benevolences Benedict was able to perform for his community was a sheltering of the John Falk family on New Year's Eve, December 31, 1836, when the Falk farm in Springs burned to the ground. It was a bitter cold night, so descendants say, and the pioneer family had to build a roaring fire on the fireplace to keep from freezing. 2 children perished in the flames, and the oldest son, John, one boot lost in the shuffle, clasped his infant sister in his arms, and fled to the Benedict Miller home for shelter. The surviving members of the family huddled about the embers of the home, while John hurried back to carry the rest of them through the sub-zero night before they should perish from overexposure. Benedict sheltered them until a new log house could be constructed on the foundation of the old. End of Aldershot quote. The Falk House fire occurred 6 months before Benedict's death. The last 3 years of Benedict's life were filled with milestone events. On September 24, 1834, Catherine, his wife of 31 years, died. She was a mother of 12 children. One child had preceded her in death. 4 of the surviving children were minors. Catherine is buried on Benedict's farm. 5 months later, Benedict's father Jacob died in Ohio on February 22, 1835. After Catherine's death, Benedict married Catherine H. Keim, a widow of Nicholas Keim, with 8 children. Of all of Benedict's and Catherine's children remained, if they all remained with them, this blended family, this marriage resulted in a household of 12 children, with Benedict at age 54 and Catherine at age 36. Benedict built a house as a second home on the farm in 1835. By that time, son Joel B., who later took over the farm, seems to have been working closely with his father on the farm and shop. And there was a hired man. When immigrant Daniel P. Gingrich was hired on the farm, Joel was his employer, according to Daniel's diary. We can think of Benedict and family occupying one of the 2 houses, and Joel and family the other. But which family lived in which house? At that point of time, Benedict had 4 minor children, and his new wife, Catherine, had 5 children from her previous marriage. Joel, at age 28, had 1 child. It seems plausible that Benedict would have continued occupancy of the larger house and Joel of the new house. The new house of 1835, with its fine craftsmanship and practical features, has been moved and is preserved in the Spruce Forest Artisan Village east of Grantsville and can be seen there. After building a house in 1835, other milestone events occurred in that year. There was a wedding. In November, daughter Susanna married Daniel P. Gingrich. There was a birth. Baby Lydia was born to Benedict and his second wife Catherine on December 22. The last year of Benedict's life was a busy one. The year 1837 started with Benedict and Catherine housing the George Falk family, whose family had burned to the ground in the night of December 31, as noted above. On March 18, Benedict, with Yost Yoder and John Gingrich, attended the ministers' meeting near Berlin, Pennsylvania. In the spring, Benedict's daughter Susan and husband Peter P. Gingrich moved to Ohio. Benedict received a letter from them on May 22 stating their safe arrival. 2 days later, May 24, Benedict penned a letter to Suzanne and Daniel in Ohio, telling of his chronic ill health with severe headache. He addressed them as meinen vielgeliebte Kinder, my dearly beloved children. Here is the final paragraph of that letter. Although I am somewhat better each day, I must endure 7 hours of terrible pain in the right side of my head. I have much medication, Dr. Stuft, to take. I do not know whether it helps. Time will tell. Benedict died 2.5 weeks later, on June 11, 1837. About a month later, daughter Magdalena was born. Bringing closure to Benedict's earthly affairs involved 3 days of public sale, the first 1 month after his death for selling some things, and the others in April of the next year. I shall close with yet another quote from Benedict's letter of 1837. May God's grace attend you. It is He who keeps us under His protection and blessing, and keeps us from all evil till we arrive in a better place where all pain and attending sorrows will end. I would like for Nathan now to be of assistance. In addition to all my other handicaps, my hearing aids have gone out, and so I don't believe I'll be able to hear what you're saying. But be free to talk, and if I need to respond to something, Nathan will tell me what it is. This is open discussion.
How many hours did you spend getting this topic ready?
It has not been added up yet. I do have numerous endnotes to go with, though.
Am I correct in thinking that Benedict's home, farm number 3, was out here at Springs? Joe Yoder currently owns it, bought it from his dad, or took it over from his dad, Joe Yoder.
Can you help me out?
Joe Yoder bought from Joel Yoder, farm number 3 out here in Springs of Benedict's. Is that the farm that Joe Yoder bought from Joel Yoder?
Yes, that known as Barkelt, and it was a farm of Peter Beachy II. From there it went to Benedict. From there it went to Joe B. Miller, Benedict's son. From there it went to Joe B. Miller's daughter, Anna, and John or Hans Yoder, then to Amos Yoder, then to Joel Yoder, then to Joseph Yoder, I believe. Is that who has it now, I believe? Yeah. It's an interesting thing. The Joel B. Miller history, the very last entry, the very last family entered into that book is the Joseph Yoder family, who currently has the farm of Joel B. Miller.
Thank you.
Well, perhaps a good way to end this particular session then is with Benedict's benediction that I had read, and that came right out of the letter that he had written in 1835 to his daughter and son-in-law, who had very recently moved to Ohio. But back to the moderator now.
Well, thank you very much for preparing all of that. I think it's very much appreciated by everyone. At this time, it's the conclusion of the presentations. There will be lunch downstairs. I'm going to dismiss us with a word of prayer for that lunch. And You are obviously free to discuss and ask questions to whomever you please for as long as you wish. I guess until someone wants to go home from Maple Glen and wishes to leave and lock the doors. So let me say a prayer for the lunch and then consider yourselves dismissed. Lord, thank you for all of the people who have dedicated time and energy to preparing this service and also for the food in the basement. I pray that their efforts are not unrewarded, that they can gain some satisfaction, and I pray that that service isn't unnoticed, that they know that it's not unnoticed, and thank you for all of their efforts. Also, as we eat lunch and discuss, I pray that the energy we get from the food that we ultimately use in service of you as we go from here to take a new perspective or aspect on life, that we can use that to ultimately reach the people around us that we meet and know, to either encourage them in their service of you and their life living for you, or reach people who don't know you to you. In Jesus' name, amen.